Drawing on your experience as Secretary of State, if you were en route to Alaska, what would you be looking to get? What does an acceptable deal look like? Or would you frankly not be going to Alaska at all?
I would not be, but I think we have to deal with the reality that we have. And President Trump has decided to go to Alaska to meet with Putin on our territory, in our state, on a military base. So I would be focused on trying to persuade him that he gains nothing by capitulating to Putin. I understand from everything I've read, he very much would like to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. And honestly, if he could bring about the end to this terrible war where Putin is the aggressor, invading a neighbor country, trying to change the borders, if he could end it without putting Ukraine in a position where it had to concede its territory to the aggressor, had to, in a way, validate Putin's vision of greater Russia, but instead could really stand up to Putin, something we haven't seen, but maybe this is the opportunity to make it clear that there must be a ceasefire, there will be no exchange of territory, and that over a period of time, Putin should be actually withdrawing from the territory he seized in order to demonstrate his good faith efforts, let us say, not to threaten European security. If we could pull that off, if President Trump were the architect of that, I'd nominate him for a Nobel Peace Prize, because my goal here is to not allow capitulation to Putin, aided and abetted by the United States. I think that's a terrible, terrible precedent. And I think it would make our country less safe. I think it would reward Putin's aggression, and he will not stop. We know that. You know, you can dream, Jessica, you can dream. And I'm dreaming that for whatever combination of reasons, including the elusive Nobel Peace Prize, President Trump may actually stand up to Putin on behalf of not just Ukraine and its democracy and its very brave people, but frankly, on behalf of our own security and interests.
The headlines, and we've been consuming a ton of media about this, and every single headline that I've read does not suggest that this is going to go well for the United States and that Putin is, licking his lips, essentially, at the prospect of being invited to our soil. And in the press briefing, Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary, said that we were honored to have him, which is definitely not the language I would be using, or I think maybe any other press secretary would be using about this. There's the story about Special Envoy Witkoff misunderstanding what Putin was saying and coming back to the president and saying, oh, he wants to make concessions, when I don't think those words would ever be uttered by Vladimir Putin under any circumstances. And Donald Trump has really been trying to tamp down expectations since this was announced. So we went from, we're going to get a great deal, then it leaks out that he's frustrated that Putin tells him one thing and does another, which is the most obvious thing that Vladimir Putin does. And now this is, quote unquote, a learning exercise. Putting aside the idea of a Hillary Clinton nominating Donald Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize, what do you think is realistic to come out of Friday's meeting? And keeping in mind that Zelensky has come out this week and said that ceding territory in the Donbass is absolutely off the table, and he has never been given any security guarantee whatsoever. And he said, I'll leave office for tomorrow. I'll disappear from public life if you let us into NATO, if you make it clear that you're going to protect my people.
Well, the first thing I hope President Trump is either told or reminded of when he lands at our base in Alaska is that he is landing at the very base that has to send up fighter planes to watch and fend off Russian bombers that routinely harass our military assets, do overflights, engage in provocative behavior in the skies above Alaska. I hope he's reminded of that. He is not meeting with a friend. He is meeting with an adversary, and an adversary who hopes to play him. And the best thing that could come out of this, frankly, is probably nothing agreed to, except a real strengthening of President Trump's understanding that Putin is not someone you can make a deal with and expect it to last. What I'm hoping is that on this listening exercise, which is now being called, President Trump will take off the blinders or the rose-colored glasses that he has worn in dealing with Putin in the past and recognize that he's dealing with someone who wants to see the destruction of the United States and the Western alliance. We know that Russia's behind a cyber attack on our federal court system. going into filings, ferreting out information, some of it the most personal, private information and government information that you could possibly find. If President Trump goes in with a better sense that he can be a peacemaker, okay, but not a Neville Chamberlain peacemaker, a Donald Trump tough peacemaker who holds Putin to account and protects the Ukrainian people, gives them the security that they need, including a path to NATO, and basically stands firm with our allies who have been extraordinarily supportive of President Trump during this first, 6-7 months of his second term, and really make a stake like Churchill. Make a stake against aggression. Make a stake for freedom and democracy. Now, that would be extraordinary, and that's what I would like to see come out of this.
I would like that as well. And you mentioned the term liberal world order, and there's been a lot of conversation about the breakdown, right, of the post-World War II order, and we don't have the same kind of relationships with our allies. To put it in Clintonian terms, there's a lot of dumb power being used, not a lot of smart power. How far, I guess, you think this breakdown has been, if we would be welcomed back into the proverbial fold? It seems like from the NATO summit that is the case, that our European allies are just waiting for Donald Trump to turn around and say, actually, I would like to go back to more or less the way things were because we are better together than we are on our own. What are your thoughts on that?
Jessica, I actually was encouraged by the events of the last several months. First of all, the NATO commitment by individual member states to increase their defense spending is very welcome. It's something that prior administrations have certainly sought, and I think it's great that we are seeing these commitments that now have to be followed through on. The willingness of European countries to support Ukraine, and by doing so, buy American weapons in order to provide them to the Ukrainians. I think all of that is a very good signal that there is beginning to be a better understanding, both by the president and the people around him, as well as by the leaders of our European allies, that there can be common ground amongst us. And the kind of dismissiveness that we saw in the first Trump administration has been replaced by a much more obvious working relationship to the good of European security, transatlantic security, and hopefully Ukrainian security. So I'm actually encouraged. I want to go back to something you said also, though. I think it's very unfortunate that President Trump only has one envoy for all the problems in the world. He sends Mr. Witkoff to deal with Putin. He sends him to deal with Iran. He sends him to deal with the Middle East, with Gaza. I mean, there is no way. I don't know the gentleman. Let's assume he's extraordinary.